Drink beer, it's good for you.
Hello and welcome to the video. In this video I'll be looking at the topic of pressure fermentation for beer. One area that many homebrewers tend to neglect when they first begin with homebrewing is the importance of yeast and thus fermentation. Many start by simply fermenting yeast at room temperatures, and many find that this presents a less than satisfactory result. They then seek a way to improve this, typically without spending a lot more money, and the process moves on until they either invest in full temperature control or go the pressure fermentation route. For the vast majority of homebrewers, the main issue is having too high a temperature for fermentation, especially when it comes to lager fermentation. Pressure fermentation does not need precise temperature control to work, and works very well to help prevent off flavours linked to fermentations that are too hot. Ever since the 1960s, commercial brewers started using pressurized fermentation as a tactic to produce very clean fermentation results, whilst fermenting hot, and thus speeding up the time that it takes for the yeast to complete its job. This was vastly just used in producing lager though, as those fermentations took longer compared to ale. In the 1980s, more experimentation was done with ale yeast under pressure, and the results did not go as well as expected, especially when compared to the pressure results of lager. Since this time, much more experimentation has taken place, and new beer styles have also sprung up. These days in general, it is accepted that the main beer types that benefit from fermentation under pressure are lagers and hoppy beers. Let's now look at the potential positives and negatives that pressure can have on your yeast. I will begin with the positive. As discussed already, you can ferment at warmer temperatures without the usual off flavours. This is because pressure fermentation suppresses ester production. Usually this is something that is just controlled by lower temperatures, especially with lager yeast. Also, because you are fermenting hotter, full attenuation has a far better chance of being reached, and also being reached faster. In addition to this, because your fermentation vessel's headspace is full of CO2, you have removal of oxygen, making your beer last longer. Beer styles like New England IPA and also wheat beers, they have volatile ingredients. This can actually make a huge difference. A fermentation under pressure is less vigorous and has also a reduced Krausen. This means you can enjoy a lower headspace than normal and ferment more beer at once from the same fermentation vessel. Another great benefit is that the CO2 in your vessel is used to naturally carbonate as your fermentation is in progress. This means you are getting free CO2 from your yeast, and your desired carbonation level will be ready faster. Also, because your vessel is not blowing off as often, you are keeping the aroma of your beer much more than a fermentation would using an airlock. Because we essentially taste with our mouths and noses, this tends to lead to an improvement in hoppy beers for many people. We are all different though, so no guarantees here with this or anything taste related. All these potential positives are there on the basis that you are using the level of pressure that your yeast is happy with. Let's now look at the negatives. I want to make it crystal clear that these negatives only apply if you have too much pressure. By having too much pressure, this will have an adverse effect on your yeast, and its health will decline. This will greatly reduce yeast growth and viability, which can lead to death in more extreme cases, but usually just stalls the process. This can mean that the yeast will fail to fully attenuate or clean up after itself. This will result in a sweeter beer than intended, with a less clean taste. So clearly, as you can see, it is important to have your yeast under the right amount of pressure, so let's look at this next. It is vital to realise that different types of yeast handle pressure very differently. When you are using a new yeast under pressure, it is best to test it at low pressures first and check the end results. 5 psi is a great starting point. See how it reacts. Alternatively, you may find some good information online about experience of pressure levels from others for certain yeast types. Just be sure to be confident of the source. My advice would be to stick to an absolute maximum pressure of 15 psi, but 10 to 12 psi is a sweet spot that is commonly agreed on. Do keep in mind that this will not apply to all yeast. Another thing to bear in mind if you are using a particularly tall fermenter is that every 2 feet will add approximately 1 psi of pressure at the bottom. Another consideration is when during your fermentation should you put your yeast under pressure. When it comes to lager yeast, this is usually done right from the start of fermentation, but this is not the case with ale yeast. With ale yeast, we usually want esters as they provide the yeast's characteristical flavours, so by adding pressure we restrict cell growth and thus ester production, which then has an effect on the overall flavour. Not good. So commonly with malt forward ale styles, the majority of the fermentation will be done usually without pressure, but then as it is closing in on the final gravity points, pressure is then added. This then will help complete the process faster and to start carbonation in a unitank. Naturally, if you have a temperature issue, then you still will need to balance this ester production by adding pressure. This of course is only in extreme temperature situations when it comes to ale yeast. When it comes to hop forward styles, yeast flavour is generally going to be neutral, so the same rules do not apply. If you plan to dry hop a beer, then you can easily just remove the pressure, add your dry hops and then repressurize. Dry hopping under pressure is a great way to go, because the aroma is kept within the vessel much more than you'll get by fermenting with an airlock. With the aroma kept in the vessel, this will naturally give the beer extra aroma. So now you know the basic facts, let's now look at what you need for pressure fermentation equipment wise. This can certainly be as simple as a keg with a spunding valve attached. Naturally the homebrew market is full of other alternatives all screaming for your attention though, with various levels of extra features and price points. Having one vessel that you can ferment and serve from is simply a great way to go from a price and time perspective, and also for removing the risk of oxidization in your end beer. I already have videos that cover a couple of these options that are more reasonably priced, and you never know what else of this nature I will cover in the future. I would love to get the opportunity to test the Spike Flex Plus, for example. Hint fully intended, come on guys. And lastly, I just know I'm going to get a lot of people asking me if I do not add this in. But no, sadly the Grainfather conical does not allow pressure fermentation, and thus cannot be used as a unitank either. Yes, I realise this was a total fail of the brain's trust at Grainfather also. People have tried modifying their conical fermenters to allow this, but it means at the very least changing the lid clips and the lid itself, and to date I've not heard of anyone doing a successful modification. There is a kit that allows you to do pressure transfer though, but I do realise that this isn't much of a consolation. Thankfully these days there are some new products on the market now that offer much cheaper options with full unitank specification. If you would like to discuss anything within this video, or for that matter anything beer related, then do consider joining my Facebook group as linked on screen now. Not only is this a great way to get good advice, but it also allows me to connect more directly with you to help shape future video content that you would like to see. This now brings this video to a close. If you have any questions then please let me know via YouTube or Facebook. I do hope that you found this video to be useful, interesting and enjoyable. If appropriate then please like this video on YouTube, and if you've not done so already then please subscribe. I regularly post new content. Happy brewing!